Okay, this is going to be a relatively short video. Um, as you can see the title here, it's a curriculum of Western Analytic Philosophy for beginners. So this is my recommendation for what like I wish somebody would have recommended to me as I was beginning, my journey into Western Analytic Philosophy. I'm limiting this book, as you can see, to 12. I'm limiting this list to 12 books, or this curriculum to 12 books, partly because I don't want to make it like too daunting to turn people off from attempting it. Now, there are some lengthy books on here. Um, okay, and then some of them I recommend like you skip certain sections, so you'll see. Um, yeah, so the purpose of this curriculum is to introduce uh, people new to philosophy, or people new to Western philosophy, or people new to Western analytical philosophy, to some of the perennial questions and some of the famous philosophers in the tradition, and also to get you to start doing philosophy, to start thinking about some of the problems that philosophers have traditionally, mulled over and like tried to come up with responses to or solutions to, basically theories. um, Not all books are going to be primary text. Some are just going to be, secondary sources on certain problems, but they'll still get you to thinking. Um, okay, so as this is a 12 book list, I obviously have to curate my list here. And you'll see that I've chosen books on ancient philosophy because I think we have to talk about Plato. Metaphysics, because, if you do ancient philosophy, you got to talk about metaphysics. Epistemology is one of the major fields, one of the traditional big three, I think: epistemology, metaphysics, and I would say philosophy of language in the analytic tradition. Logic, I put one book on logic. I wasn't going to put logic because I don't think you really need to study logic to be like good at philosophy, but this is a foundations like list, a curriculum. So yeah, logic is just like every department teaches logic. So if you're gonna uh, have a foundation in Western analytic philosophy, especially as the way it is taught in academia, you're gonna probably need to have some knowledge of logic. And then I give a history of analytic philosophy. Um, yeah, it's kind of one of my things, and like it just gives a good overview. So, and you'll see like an anthology or two here, but okay, so here we go. Let's just get started. So again, for those of you just getting into philosophy and want to understand like Western analytic philosophy, I think a good way to start is Plato. Not his Republic, but his five dialogues, or the five dialogues of Plato. Euthyphro, Apology, Credo, Meno, Phaedo. This is translated, the book I'm recommending is translated by GMA Grube. Grube is an excellent translator of Plato. And I put here, he also has an excellent translation of the Republic. So if you prefer to read the Republic, or maybe it's part of your assignment, like I would highly recommend the Grube translation. Okay, so Plato, I think, is like not overly sophisticated, and the way he writes his dialogues makes it a little bit more like amenable to those just getting into philosophy. Okay, next. Descartes is kind of out of order chronologically. Not that this list is chronological, but he's just such a big name in philosophy, like Cartesian dualism, the mind-body divide, and just his approach to doing philosophy. Like you're gonna see it further down the line. So the philosophical writings of Descartes, volume two. This is translated by Cottingham or Cottingham. I think it's just Cottingham. Uh, I think this is not Stuhoff. I think it's Stuthoff. Do I have the book here? I think I do. Hold on. I don't want to miss. Uh, yeah. It's Stuthoff. It's Stuthoff with a T. I thought so. And then Murdoch. And I think I misspelled Murdoch here. I think it's with CH. Yeah. I don't know what the heck's wrong with me here. Murdoch. Okay. So now I just recommend reading pages 1 through 62. The first early pages are like the preface or a short introduction, and then just Meditations 1 through 6, right? And there's objections that he takes up and there's responses, but I think you don't need to do all that. Just read pages 1 through 62, and you have a very good understanding, I think, of yeah, one of the classic texts in philosophy, one of the classic philosophers, in Descartes. Okay, next, my kind of things that like interest me, like I think in general, if you're interested in philosophy, you're interested in like these puzzles, these like yeah, these philosophical puzzles, these things that like these philosophical dilemmas, these I don't know if it's pronounced sorites or sorites. I think it's Greek. Anyway, these kinds of yeah, puzzles. So Paradoxes by R.M. Sainsbury, just some famous and thought-provoking paradoxes, which are fun, like Zeno's paradox and like yeah, there's a whole bunch. Achilles paradox, and to me they're interesting. Like if you just like these kinds of like head scratchers, like this is a good book. Universals, an opinionated introduction by D.M. Armstrong. Armstrong is a very good lucid writer. And this problem of universals, I think, is one of the most important problems in the history of philosophy. So, and Armstrong gives a good account. So, as I put here, it's a good introduction to an important and perennial problem in philosophy, namely the problem of universals, as it's commonly referred to. So, this is the universal, and the particulars, and the particularists. This is the divide between like nominalism, and I won't go into it. Just like this book, I recommend if you want to get into analytic philosophy, it's good to wrap your head around this problem, the problem of universals. And Armstrong is a good approach. um, the evolution of modern philosophy. This is a very unique, I would say, approach to teaching the history of analytic, to the teaching the history of metaphysics, the history of metaphysics. And this is by A.W. Moore. And he just goes down the line throughout history of people who wanted to make sense of things. Like, what is this thing? And let's study it and let's figure out what it is. Like, okay, so yeah, so this is, but metaphysics is one of the, like I said, one of the big three in philosophy. And like this is an engaging approach. It's a kind of a big book, so there are parts you might want to skip, but I would highly recommend at least the first half of this book. Epistemology, another giant subfield in philosophy. Uh, Robert Audi, it's an introductory text on the theory of knowledge and epistemic justification. Audi's another very clear writer. Like, I can't recommend enough that like you just find philosophers who write clearly and don't worry about their status. Maybe they might not be the Aristotles and Wittgensteins of philosophy, but someone like Robert Audi, someone like D.M. Armstrong, someone like what's his first name? But his last name is Averill Strom. Averill Strom. That's his first name. Averill Strom. Um, Jaguar Kim for like in philosophy of mind. Just certain philosophers just write super clearly, and you're gonna highly appreciate this quality as you're trying to wrap your head around difficult things to wrap your head around. Okay, so epistemology, if you're interested in theory of knowledge, epistemology, Audi is a good source, good entryway. Then I have an anthology here, Philosophy Basic Readings, second edition by Nigel Warburton. There are various anthologies that do the job because they cover mostly the same stuff because it's the classical or perennial, like it's a classical text in the history of philosophy. So yeah, there's not like an overall consensus, but there's a general consensus as to what those are. So you're going to see those same readings. But anyway, so this is one good book that has a lot of the good texts in it. Okay, number 8. Again, if you're new to logic, symbolic logic, you've never studied propositional logic, you've never studied or sentential logic, you've never studied predicate logic, uh, and and it is difficult. Like I think people underplay how difficult it is to study this stuff on your own. Once you had like a course, like once you had like one course in logic, like people like you've gone to school and some instructor and you've had like assignments and you get feedback and you go to lectures and things explained to you, yeah, then you can pretty much just start studying logic on your own and you can make a lot of progress on your own. But that initial book, that initial philosophy book that you pick up, and if it's just on your own and nobody's explaining anything to you, you're going to come up with a lot of questions and you're going to be confused and the terminology is going to throw you off and some of the concepts are like you're just not going to get it. Like, and so a good entryway for self-learners is Logic with Trees by Colin Housen. There are other books, but okay, so I just chose this one. So for symbolic logic. Now, this one is a bit of like you probably won't see this on anybody else's list as far as like a recommendation for beginners. But if you're going to study Western analytic philosophy, you're going to eventually want to study what Frege has to say, what Russell has to say, somewhat what Moore has to say, and then a little bit more sophisticated what Wittgenstein has to say. But to get a good entryway into Russell and Frege, well, and more, it would be nice if you had a good understanding of British idealism. So British idealism is a good entryway into analytic philosophy. Um, so this is an interesting topic on its own, British idealism, and like I said here, but this is a hefty book, 626 pages. So yeah, I don't know how committed you will be to reading this book. Um, but again, you don't have to read the whole book. You'll still get like plenty out of it if you read like the first half of the book. Um, but it'll prepare you for the rift between people like Bradley uh, and who else? I'm already forgetting some British idealists. Anyway, and Russell and G.E. Moore. Okay, and it kind of rests with their view about like the metaphysical view and Russell's view as a proponent of logical atomism. And so G. Moore is a logical atomist, and Wittgenstein turns out to be a logical atomist, and so is Frege. Anyway, and this is basically the where the battlegrounds are. Okay, so British idealism. This one's a bit of a bit different. Okay, philosophy of language. Um, if analytic philosophy is anything, it's philosophy of language. So this is the classics explained by Colin McGinn. McGinn's a good author, good philosopher. He explains 10 classic texts or essays in the philosophy of language. And if you are a philosophy undergraduate and you're going to read classic texts by Russell, by Frege, by Grice, um, maybe by Donnellan, Strawson, um, who else? Maybe Gettier, the Gettier problems. Anyway, I forget exactly which philosophers he takes up here. Maybe Kripke here, but I don't know. But McGinn does a good job of explaining these classical philosophers, their main positions from what are some of their most famous texts. Okay. 11. This one also you probably won't see too much. Sense and Sensibilia by J.L. Austin. This is a classic but much forgotten critique of sense data theory, which was Russell's theory. So Russell and G. Moore and um, other philosophers were proponents of sense data theory. Um, this is Austin's critique, and Austin is a lively debater. It's just like, yeah, he's fun to read. As fun as a philosopher can be, I think, to read. J.L. Austin is that. Okay, and then finally, The Origins of Analytical Philosophy by Michael Dummett, which I consider to be like a gem, like almost like it's not unknown, it's popular, but it's a small book, 182 pages, relatively small, on some major themes in analytic philosophy. Uh, anyway, yeah, so this is the list. I think this will give you a very solid foundation in philosophy, in how to do philosophy, in in the analytic tradition. So as opposed to the continental tradition where you see like I don't know, like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, um, I don't know, Camus, does he count? Sartre, does it count? Um, Kierkegaard, Hegel, um, I don't know, Derrida, like a bunch of like it's not analytic. It's not the analytic tradition. This is a rough divide between the analytic and continental, but these are generally considered um, analytic philosophers, and these are the problems. These are the perennial problems within the analytic tradition. Not that these problems don't creep in or crop up in the continental side. They do. Some of them do, but generally they're given more focus on the analytic side. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's it. So that's my recommendation for those of you who are wanting to get into analytic philosophy. Um, the first two are primary texts, so you're going to have to tackle their arguments. But it's just a good idea. By the way, let me make one recommendation before I'm done here. Don't get caught up on don't get caught up on refuting these philosophers. I think generally it's a given that all philosophers are presenting arguments that have flaws, arguments that you can pick apart, arguments that you can undermine to some level of like yeah, to certain levels. Nobody's offering nobody here, not even Wittgenstein, not even Aristotle, not even Plato. None of these guys are offering knockdown arguments. In other words, like you can't defeat them. They're just gonna. There's no refuting them, right? No, you can. All of them, you can. I can refute Plato. I can refute Aristotle. I can refute Wittgenstein. It's nothing. It's nothing, or at least severely undermine them. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is that these philosophers have taken up certain philosophical conundrums, problems, and they've tried to make headway into understanding these problems, and then they offer solutions to those problems. Just understanding the problem, you're making major headway into philosophy. If you understand why the problems are problematic, you're probably doing a very good job as a philosophy student. If you can then like understand why, like how, let's say, Plato's theories are like yeah, how they're not compelling, they're not compelling, uh or in what ways they're weakest, okay, that's great too. But you don't have to refute Plato. Just understand Plato, and then just understand what areas are strong in his arguments and what areas are weaker in his arguments. And you're doing a great job. Like that to me, like if you can do that, you're already like better than most philosophy students I've ever met. Um, Same thing with Descartes, right? Whether you think Cartesian dualism is like just like misguided, okay, that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really matter. Understand what Descartes was. Understand the problem Descartes was taking on. Understand his theory, and then see what parts of it like are more compelling than others. Okay, that's it. So don't think that to be good at philosophy, you have to refute these philosophers because philosophers today um, find fault with them, and there is fault with all of them. But well, except for something like symbolic logic, here it's not really an argument. It's just a language they're presenting. So just learn the language. Um, yeah. So don't get yeah don't I'm rambling. Don't get caught up in thinking that you need to refute these philosophers to be good at philosophy and to have a good understanding of philosophy. You don't. You don't. Okay, that's it. All right. If you have other suggestions, now let me say final word, final word. I swear. There are other books I could have chosen. Like this is not meant to be like the list. I'm trying to give you a foundation in the Western analytic tradition. Other books would do the job. These are the books that I've read or generally know very well. And if you have other books, like put them in the comments and they might help other people. Or I might agree with you and like, yeah, I would replace this book or I would add this book or yeah, I would replace like number, I don't know, I would maybe replace Sense and Sensibility with a book you recommend. But my goal is to limit this to 12 books. I think that's a ton of reading already. And I've chosen from somewhat of a broad spectrum, but I can't cover all the subfields in philosophy. There are more than 12 subfields in philosophy, so just that alone would make it impossible. Uh, Unless it got very, very shallow treatment. So like just a bunch of anthologies and yeah. So anyway, okay, I hope this helped. I gotta go. I don't have to go, but I'm rambling. Later. Sayonara. Yamata. Matane. Um, Watashi wa baka desu.